Hello book friends, this is Most Bookish and I am back with another book review video. The adults are the ones that are just making the world harder. I always say that funny, universal. It's the Universal Exposition. What book feels more springtime than Alice in Wonderland? One of my hands is no longer usable. I know I can like clip it to something, but I like holding it like a little ice cream cone. Springtime is upon us. By the calendar, it's in March, but everybody acts like spring is in April. I feel like because of Easter. I live in Florida, so it's always summer. This is really just for you guys. Books of spring, books that feel like spring. I do not know how to describe this idea that books feel like something. Genres and specific books feel like seasons or time periods. They have personalities. We all know how much I love a book, so the fact that I'm likening them to nature and people is not surprising. A feeling of burgeoning, a feeling of renewal. I feel like spring is innocence, beginnings, romance, it's simplicity. So I picked books that felt like those feelings, and they're all different parts of what I just described. So let's get into it. I have these children's books. It is a series called the Wildwood Chronicles. It is a series of 3 books. They are kind of chunky, bumpy, and lumpy. Mucho. Do we know? Yes. Okay. I do, clearly. Anyways, so she is thick, but she's short. She's short and thick, like me. Huh? Oh, crack me up. This series I have a special love in my heart for. I love fairy tales for adults, but I also love children's stories that are told so well that it's just a good story. It is for children, but you can enjoy reading it, like Harry Potter, A Lord of the Rings, even though I don't think that's considered a children's story. It's more advanced than, let's say, a Chronicles of Narnia. The story has more depth, and it's not as frivolous feeling in some ways as like a Percy Jackson. It's based on these 2 kids. This is actually the first one, Wildwood. We have Wildwood, Wildwood Imperium, and Under Wildwood. The story is basically a young girl. I love that it's a female protagonist. It's a young girl. I want to say she's 12. She lives in Oregon, and she is a very independent young lady who is trusted very much by her parents, to the point where she like lives in this cute little neighborhood, and she takes her little brother, her baby brother, around in a little red wagon that she pulls along with her bike. It reminds me of stories from the 90s, of movies or books about kids back then, where there was a whole lot more maturity. The expectation that a kid could ride around a city pulling her little brother in a wagon was normal, whereas today I feel like police would be called. She's taking him to the park to like hang out for the day, but he gets abducted by crows, like a murder of crows. I love the prose inside of this book. It's kind of poetic. She panics because she was supposed to have been in charge of him. She tries to chase the crows, and then she comes upon the impassable wilderness, which is like this giant wood that is impassable. She realizes that she's going to have to go in after him. So she goes home, kind of makes this whole facade of putting him to sleep. The parents don't realize that he's missing. She pretends to go to sleep, and then she sets out to go save her brother. She's followed to the wood by Curtis, who is a classmate of hers, and he's kind of like a nerdy, not paid attention to, just kind of overall nondescript young man. He follows her and asks her what's going on, and she ends up telling him that she has to go save her brother, and he decides he's going to help her. They set out on an adventure through the wood. In that way, it is very of the tradition of a Chronicles of Narnia, a Tolkien, a kind of friends on an adventure to fight evil or to save someone. But along the way, there are the lessons learned, and there's a kind of moving from being a child to being not a young adult, but moving into the next phase of growth, which would be her teenage years. And there's a letting go of the idea that adults know everything, that adults are making the right decisions. There are a lot of times where they realize that the adults are the ones that are just making the world harder, and they don't understand what has happened to the values that they have supposedly, disseminated amongst children that should have been still in place. It's a bit heartbreaking at a certain point. One of the evil characters is a governess who was ruler of a portion of the wood until she lost her mind after she lost her son. And so it's also speaking a bit about loss, the things that we lose in life. Sometimes it's land, sometimes it's our people, sometimes it's actual people that we love. There are talking animals all through the wood, foxes and birds, and there are the good guys and the bad guys. But interestingly, it turns out that the bad guys aren't always just the bad guys. It's not that simple. It's very much like life. I feel like it's teaching lessons to children, for the children who are reading this, about how we exist inside of a larger world. There's a lot of politics going on in here. A part of why her brother gets stolen has to do with politics and the Duchess having been overthrown and the different principalities and how these guys are fighting with these guys, and you can't go into that portion of the wood because there was, a skirmish however long ago. The author uses this very small little insulated world to kind of represent our larger world. And I just really had so much fun. It is not a super quick read because even though it's short, it is pretty thick. It's around 500 pages. It's not super simplistic. The writing is not super simplistic, so it doesn't go by, like you can't read it in a day, but it is really good, and all three are definitely worth the read. And the world that's created is just, it's a perfect little fantasy world to throw yourself into during the springtime where everything feels like, woodsy and growing. That's what's happening here. The kids are growing, nature is growing, the world is growing. They're realizing that their world isn't this small, it's now much bigger with wonders that they didn't even imagine. Feeling like the next part is scary and the part you left is a little sad, but your next adventure is awaiting. Wildwood is by Colin Meloy. The illustrations are Carson Ellis. I have to tell you guys that the illustrations inside of this book are so beautiful. So why should you read it? If you love a story about an enchanted wood, friends who go on an adventure together, this one's for you. Keeping to that theme, A Warning About Swans is a book of poetry by a Florida author, which is really exciting. It is woodsy with creatures, but it's a bit more fantastical in a way. It's in a completely different world, and it's a really fast read, but it's just so beautiful, and it's a different kind of story. So I'm just going to read a little part of the jacket so you can understand what I'm saying. Hildy was dreamed into existence by the god Odin, and along with her 5 sisters, granted cloaks that transform them into swans. Each sister's cloak is imbued with a unique gift, but Hildy rejects her gift, which allows her to lead the souls of dying creatures to the afterlife. This one is more for teens than kids. It's marketed more to teens than kids. There is a Baron Maximilian. There is a non-binary Jewish artist, Franz Mendelssohn. It is a kind of book about nature and loving the wild things, or it's a very long poem about nature and loving the wild things, but it's also about love. It's a love story, and the way that it ends is just so beautiful. I don't want to say anything more because I don't want to ruin kind of the journey that you go on through this book. This one's a little over 300 pages, super, super fast. You can read this in a day, but I would say take a little longer because it's just so beautifully lyrical. And it's also, again, kind of political. I guess everything that I read, from children's books to nonfiction to, I don't know, I'm a political kind of girl, I suppose. There's a part that says, I didn't believe a boy could ever be a weapon. When I walked through the castle gates as morning bleeds into afternoon, Richter feels no different than the bow and arrow he is toying with in the courtyard. I just love it. Stone River Gods. And I've always liked stories about swans. I feel like that's a thing. The Swan Princess, the movie, I loved it when I was a kid. Is that a thing from my generation? Were we about swans? Did they do that to us? I don't know. Thinking of The Princess and the Swan, that was a usual fairy tale of the 90s, of the 2000s, where the prince saves the princess, who's a swan. He unlocks, the woman inside. And this is kind of turning that on its head, in that just because somebody is rich and a prince, it doesn't mean he's the good guy. It doesn't mean he's the hero. In fact, maybe he could be the bad guy. And it wasn't like a diatribe that all guys are bad. It was just, saviors aren't always altruistic. Most often they want things from you in return, things that you may not want to give. You will like this if, you love just kind of romantic, fantastical poetry, and you just want to spend like a nice weekend with talking animals. Lots of talking animals. Is spring about talking animals? I think so. I think that's a thing too. Keeping with the theme of love, but taking like a hard detour, we're going to go with romance. This was one of the books that I found in my blind date with a book. It came from Steamy Lit. It is a love story about a Caribbean heiress. A Caribbean heiress in Paris is the name of the book. It's by Adriana Herrera. It's based in Paris in 1889 at the Exposition Universelle. I always say that funny, Universelle. It's the Universal Exposition, which, as I said before, is problematic, but they don't really get into that in here. They get into what it's like her being a Dominican, an Afro-Dominican woman at that time as a business owner in Paris. But they don't really talk about like the problematic expositions themselves. So either way, there's some history in here. There's some politics because again, she is like a badass woman who's trying to be in a space that she's clearly unwanted in. And then there's a very large, muscular, attractive Scotsman who is very progressive and who wants nothing but to help this vibrant golden woman that he just can't keep away from. The way that it's written is very progressive. It's not just talking about a woman being a businesswoman of color at the time. The way that the male character is written is like very progressive and understanding and open-minded about asking for permission, about respecting a woman's agency. There is romance found in him supporting her autonomy. It's a different kind of romance. And I haven't really read a lot of romances lately. So I'm wondering if romance is written more like this now, even though the romantasy that I've read is not like that. It's very much harken back to the Harlequinish behaviors. So that's interesting. It's a little cheesy romantic, but I feel like, again, springtime, like we're, flowers are blooming. There's cinnamon in the air. There's the smell of rum. She is a distiller. She has a rum empire. City of Romance. I don't think this is in springtime. When was the exposition held? It was in May. Look at that. I told you, books feel like moments. I'm going to change this channel's name from Most Bookish to The Book Whisperer because I better tell somebody about me. You should read this book. This book is, again, the story of her trying to make it. There's like, very simple obstacles put in their way. When I say simple, I don't mean that they weren't a real thing that happened. If taken from like the historical sense, the obstacles in her way as a woman at this place in time, this kind of woman in this place in time, were very serious. But I mean, in the sense of the story, like the obstacles are overcome fairly quickly. It's really about kind of the romance between the two of them. A little spice, but not like, every other page full of spice. If you do like your spice to be explicit, because again, going from children, teen books, this is an adult book. This is for adults. Disclaimer. I read this in a day. Very easy. It's like 300 pages. And again, you can have that little spring fling. Oh, that's a term. You can have a little spring fling with the Caribbean heiress in Paris. Okay, since we're being progressive about love and children's agency and expected roles, Ms. Judy Blume, the original children's author, the original writer who wrote girls especially in a more realistic way, who made us more complex, showed girls in the world that they were not alone in their feelings and the things that they were going through. I love Judy Blume. She has had a renaissance the last few years. This book is called The Genius of Judy, How Judy Blume Rewrote Childhood for All of Us by Rachelle Bergstein. It's basically Judy Blume's life story, going from being a mom to the famous writer that we know. She has several books that are now banned books. And this woman started writing in the 1960s. So that we're now 50 years later, 65 years later. She is still a banned author. That she was that progressive because she was presenting children as people, as complicated, fully formed people. She really is the original. If you love children's books from way back, if you still read them today like I do, reading about Judy Blume is always a good time. You should read this if you like biography. Back to the memoir biography girl. or if you love Judy. I was in Tallahassee at an Airbnb and they had the most beautiful bookcase with a collection of books that were 50 years old. 50 years old down to maybe like 15 years old, 20 years old. It was the collection of the family. The owners of the home were elderly and they had kind of amassed books from their entire life at the house, including their children's life at the house. They still had like the markings on the wall of how the kids grew up, their heights. They had guitar books from when their son played guitar when he was a teenager. They had gardening books from when the wife would be gardening out back. They had old mysteries. They had a lifetime of books there. And I found that so touching. And I found a Judy Blume book from the 1970s. One of the currently still banned books, Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. It was an original printing. I think it might have been the 3rd edition. I asked the Airbnb owner if I could buy it from her. And she was so sweet and she said I could have it. She said that that was one of the books that she studied for children's lit when she was in college. How fantastical. Studying Judy when she was in college in the 70s. Studying a contemporary author to today, 50 years later.
Such a classic.
Wild. I tell you guys, books find me. Books find me on my journey. I find books. Books save me. Last one for springtime. Alice in Wonderland. You would say, I know this story. I've seen it in movies. I've read about it a billion times. I would say, no, you haven't, because FYI, 1, this is a long ass story. 2, it's a weird story. What's in the movies is very small pieces of what's in this book. The idea is still there, right? Alice down the rabbit hole, all the weird creatures talking to her, but it's weirder and she talks a lot more. In the movies, she doesn't have as many conversations. It's the creatures talking to her. In here, she's very talkative. This is a beautiful book that I got from a company called Story Arts, and they create these books. It's very interactive. Like there's flaps that you move around. There are things that you open. This guy, you like turn him. It's a really cool book. I have a thing where different books occupy different spaces of time in my day. I don't like to read stories that are exciting or super stimulating right before bed because then I have weird dreams and it's like watching a thriller or an action movie right before you go to sleep. Like you don't want to do that. You want to watch Friends. You want to watch something comforting. You want something that's going to actually put you to sleep. So I use fairy tales or fashion magazines, uncomplicated things that are kind of just pleasant to go to sleep to if I'm going to read before I go to sleep. Alice in Wonderland is wonderful to read before you go to sleep. She talks so much, sometimes it will put you to sleep. But this particular book, it's just so nice. You're looking through it, the illustration itself, besides the interactive parts, is so beautiful. All the patterns are really artistic and even just the jacket. I like it a lot. And this one, again, I mean, what book feels more springtime than Alice in Wonderland? There's little rabbits all over it. It's outside. It's green. You can't get any more spring than that, guys. I would say that it tries to be political if we're kind of going to that theme here, but it's too weird to really have a statement. There's like power dynamics, and I feel like that comes across much more in the movies, whereas in the book, it's just really weird. It's really, really weird. So why you should read it is if you want to know the actual full original story, this is for you. And if you like to kind of relax your mind before you go to sleep, this is also for you. I mean, the queen is trying to like off-whiz his head for everybody, but it doesn't feel violent or like wild. Again, it's just weird. So book friends, that's it. We made it to the end of another most bookish video. I hope that you're enjoying these. I'm trying to find like exactly what I want to say about books and have that come across. And I feel like in my last video, I got there, and I'm hoping that I'm staying there. I want to tell you guys all about my love affair with books so that you can have a love affair too. We want to be in this together. Subscribe, like, come back next time. All of the time that you guys spend with me is so amazing that you take literal time out of your life to spend it here. I'm so grateful, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye, book friends.